Hi, I'm Ian, and welcome back to the Northland Workshop. If you're like me, you tend to make things out of either plywood or glued up solid wood, and you end up with panels about this size. Well, an easy way to cross-cut panels that size is on the table saw, if you have a panel cutting jig such as this. This is made out of 3 pieces, a scrap piece of plywood, a scrap piece of pine, and an aluminum runner. So today we're going to see how to make a very accurate and very useful jig that you will use on just about every project going forward. The very first thing I need to do is to measure from the edge of the miter gauge slot to the blade, and in this case it's 4 1/4 inches. So what I'm going to do is set the miter gauge bar on the sled to 5 inches, and that'll give me some material to trim off so I get a 0 clearance between the blade and the edge of the sled, giving me cleaner cuts. Speaking of the runner that's going to go in the miter gauge slot, you have 2 main choices. You can make one out of hardwood, or you can buy a store-bought one made out of aluminum. In this case, I went with the store-bought one. And the reason for this is around here, the humidity varies drastically between the winter when it's dry and the summer when it's humid. If I was to try and make one out of hardwood, it would swell in the summertime and shrink in the wintertime. So if I made it so it could slide in the summertime, it would be very loose and I wouldn't get an accurate cut in the wintertime. If I made it so it was accurate in the wintertime, I wouldn't be able to push the thing in the summertime. So because of that, and how inexpensive these metal guides are, I went with the metal one. Now you can get them in different lengths, and you can get them where they are pre-threaded, so it makes it easy to just attach the piece of plywood to the runner. However, the issue is my panel cutter isn't as wide as this thing is long, which means I can get 2 of those holes to hit it, but I need 1 more. So we're going to have to do just a little bit of metalworking, but as you'll see, it's really not that bad. First thing I need to do is lay out for this other screw hole. Here's the piece of plywood I'm going to use for the base of the panel cutter, and if we put the guide bar on, you'll see that the first 2 holes hit, but the third one doesn't. So what I want to do is add 1 more hole to this thing right about here. And if I measure down, this is 1 3/4 inches down from this edge. So to make it kind of symmetrical, I'm going to do the same thing for this edge. So if I measure up 1 3/4 inches, I can go ahead and take my pencil and just mark that right on there. I don't know if it shows up on camera, but the blue anodized aluminum shows pencil marks very easily, so you don't need anything special to mark it with. Now that center punch mark will guide the drill bit when I start drilling it over at the drill press. And a center punch is nothing more than a giant nail set that comes to a point, and it's made for putting little divots in metal. The drill press makes short work of drilling holes in aluminum, and the nice thing is with the table set to 90 degrees, you know that hole is going to be perpendicular to the face of it. All the rest of the holes in this bar are threaded, and that way the machine screws can grab a hold of it and hold it to the bottom of the jig. However, the hole we just drilled is just a hole. So we need to thread it, and the way we thread metal is using something called a tap. Now a tap is a special bit that has threads designed to cut the metal in order to form threads of its own that we can screw a bolt or a machine screw into. So the way it works is you get it started, and you want to start it as straight up and down as possible. If it wanders a little bit, It's not a huge deal because it'll straighten itself out as it goes through the hole. Now once it starts feeling like there's some resistance, you want to back it up about a quarter of a turn to break off the chip that's inside it, and then you can continue on. The big thing is you want to put even pressure on these handles, because if you push it from just one side, there's a really good chance you're going to snap off the tap. I've marked a spot 5 inches away from the edge of the piece of plywood that's going to be the base of our panel cutter. Your measurement will vary depending on what the distance is between your miter gauge slot and the blade. Just remember to take that measurement and add about 1/2 inch to 1 inch of overhang, so that way you get a precise cut the first time you use it. Now I'm going to take the miter gauge bar and line it up against that line, and I'm going to take my framing square that I know is square and put it up against it and line it up so that way the miter gauge bar is square to the piece of plywood. The more accurate you are with this part of the build, the easier it's going to be later on. Now what I want to do is take a couple clamps and clamp this bar down. I'm going to check one more time to make sure it's square, and it looks like it is. The easiest way I've found to mark locations for holes like this is to take a drill bit that fits in there as snugly as it can and just tap it with a hammer. Then rotate it a little bit. Just keep rotating and tapping a couple times, and that'll give you an indent that is exactly in the center of that hole. In order to hold the guide bar onto the bottom side of this, I need to recess the head of these machine screws. The nice thing about these machine screws is they have a tapered head, so I can just use a regular old countersink bit to countersink the holes. Now we will see that yep, that's below the surface. That'll be fine. With the runner installed, it's time to make the first cut, cleaning up this edge. Using the freshly cut edge as a reference point, I'm going to square up this front fence. Now in theory, everything should be square, so I should be able to just line up this edge and have it work, but it never hurts to double check these things. Once I've got it where I want it, I can go ahead and nail one corner with a 1-inch brad. Now, double checking once again that everything lines up. I can go ahead, pin it a couple more times. And that looks good. Now I need to make one more cut to cut the fence to length. I think it's time for the maiden voyage. Now this is a typical panel size that I would cut with this thing. So I put it on, and if I had a cut mark, I could line that up with the fence because I know the fence is exactly where the saw is going to cut. Now an easy way to check it for squares is to simply flip it over, butt the other edge up against the fence, and see if the edge is flush all the way along. And this is. So that's nice and square. So that's all it takes to make a very useful shop tool.